how do you see these advances in technology affect how children in the future or adults are also going to be learning and applying what they're learning?
When magazines first came out in the 1800s or so, people were appalled because they said, all these magazines, these popular magazines are coming out. People are not going to really think in an in-depth way as they have prior to the advent of popular magazines being published. People always just kind of seem to get their knickers in a knot about new technologies and so forth. And it is absolutely true that if students truly believe that all they need is the answer and not the process of getting that answer, yeah, it will create a problem for those students. But I think this problem is even arising because we never teach students how their brain works. I mean, can you believe it? It's like, students will have 10 to 18 years of education, taking hundreds and hundreds of classes, and we never teach them simply how do they learn most effectively. It's just crazy. And so I think that it's very clear that generative AI can be both helpful and harmful in learning because you can go in and, like, if you're interested in something, you can start asking and going deep and deeper and deeper. And then you're going to find some things where it answers you wrong. And then you start going in and looking elsewhere, and you're digging deeper and deeper and learning more and more as a consequence of the fact that you have a tutor that's right there with you answering your questions, not next week when you can meet the tutor, but right when you need it. So there will be good things and bad things coming out of generative AI, but for heaven's sakes, we don't want to not let students use generative AI. At the same time, we just need to acknowledge we're at the cutting edge of a freaking revolution that is fully on par with the printing press and the great revolution that caused, except ours is faster moving. So we don't have all the answers to it. And that's okay. We're kind of figuring things out. But I think as long as we teach students how their brains learn and have them keep that in mind when they are using ChatGPT and test, test, test all the time. Low stakes quizzes where they cannot go and use ChatGPT just to make sure they are really getting it in their mind and they're not procrastinating in their learning.
Hmm. Do you think that's why your MOOC was so successful? Because it simply taught people how their brains functions, like daydreaming is not so bad for you. It actually can help you in the learning process with creativity, chunking, the importance of that, the different modes of thinking. Do you think that that's why your program was so successful in part?
Oh, absolutely. Plus, it's funny. Uh, and it has great visuals that, like, normally you wouldn't have explained to you that a neuron has an axon, a dendritic spine, and a spine that it hooks on, and they hook together, and that's how you form the initial link that is involved in memory. All sounds kind of super boring. But if you can learn that it's kind of like a space alien, neurons have legs, that are kind of these amorphous, goofy things, and they have a bunch of toes on their legs, and they reach out with their arm that's an axon, and they like to tickle the toe of an adjoining neuron. And you're learning about learning, but kind of in a really fun way, but a fun way that helps you grasp key ideas really quickly. And you have instructors that are enthusiastic and really at the top of the world. For example, my co-instructor, Terry Sanowski, is one of only 12 human beings who's simultaneously a member of all three national academies. We're not talking somebody just kind of coming up with something in their backyard, not to say I don't like barbecues that arise from the backyard. So, but, we're giving you information in a really quick to assimilate way. And it just really boggles me. Like, they invited me to speak at Harvard, and I walked in the room and it was packed. And I was like, Colin, why are there so many people here? And it turned out our one little course had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's massive open online courses and online courses put together made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. And yet, some of the people in that meeting were like, the reason your course is so popular, just, you know, it makes things so fun. You're just making it so easy for people. It's like, hello, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's actually where a lot of creativity actually comes from.
Can you expand on that? That's where a lot of creativity comes from. Like, can you expand on that?
Sure. I had a student in my class. He was terrible. I mean, he just, like I'd be, George, okay, what's the answer to this question? And George would be like, what? Staring out the window. But I really liked George, because I could sense that there was something like the very fact that he couldn't really focus really well, was also involved in why he thought about things in really different ways.
Mhm.
In fact, I just was up and I had breakfast with one of my favorite students who was in my electromagnetics class. And he was like so goofy in class. And half the time he wasn't really even paying attention and stuff. And do you know he is now the head of a major medical imaging laboratory? And he's got his PhD and he's really a superstar. My other goofy student he won the Boss Kettering Award for the most creative insights in at GM. I mean, there's this reservoir of creativity amongst seemingly normal people who aren't,
Mhm.
the class superstars. And even when they were studying IQ back in the 1930s, he tested all the students in California to pick out the smartest ones because they were going to be the ones to move and shake society. And as the decades went by, he found that not a one of them turned into a mover and shaker of society. In fact,
Mhm.
many of the ones who were turned down for the program did become the movers and shakers in society.
Really? That's fascinating. That is fascinating. I almost want to ask what's going on with all these goofy kids in school, like like in class. Like what's like from my experience, I want to jump to is it like neurodivergence? Is it ADHD and we didn't know? To me, it touches based on we didn't teach kids about how their brain functions because we didn't fully understand what was going on in the brains, or we didn't figure out how to translate that to the general population and fully apply it yet. But I mean, in a silly way, what's up with all the goofy kids? And how do teachers even begin to recognize that, hey, this kid is, it's not that they're just goofy, it's just what we're teaching them, perhaps the environment, or maybe their attention is more focused towards this thing and we can focus on their strength is versus trying to, I wanted to say to focus on the strengths versus the weakness, but I mean, there's a flaw in that thinking itself. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
That's an interesting question. I think people have tried to grapple with intelligence by, putting a number on it and calling it IQ. But if you think about it, I think there are a lot of really smart, whatever smart is, kids who aren't able to focus. And so that means that they can be really, like disruptive in class and they can't focus intently for long periods of time to be learning things, but there's some real intelligence there. It's their executive functioning system. There's some evidence, for example, that in kids who have dyslexia, what can happen is if they have a very difficult Like something happened, like I have a friend who was kidnapped when she was young and she was abducted, and they returned her like a day later, but she got dyslexia. So that can happen because of difficulties in your life. And what happens is your metabolic system within your brain, it, instead of pouring energy into the executive functioning network that allows you to focus, it pours energy instead into developing that sort of more diffuse default mode network, which helps make you diffusely aware of like potential bad things that could come out of the environment. So one thing that can happen in some kids is they can be really smart, but those executive functioning circuits, the executive circuits are not really tuned in and enhanced as the child is developing. And that means that they can't focus as easily, but the smarts are all still there. They just, so there can be lots and lots of reasons that, different students may not, they can have real intelligence, real creativity, but they can't manifest it as easily for a variety of reasons. Also, so there's two different networks in the brain. There's like task positive networks that are involved in your ability to focus. And then there's that diffuse default mode network related to creativity. Sometimes when I'm in China, for example, I will have teachers come up to me and say, I have a problem. My students are not creative. And you think about that, what is really happening in China, there's great respect for learning. So, and there's a lot of emphasis on doing well on tests, which means you focus, focus, focus all the time. And then when you take a break, sort of a societal way of taking a break involves mantra style meditation, which is focusing. And there is evidence that if you focus, focus, focus all the time, that can suppress that more creative default mode network. So make it so it's not as strongly functioning. And then it's the education and cultural system itself that has sort of attuned children away from that sort of, messing around and, that way of thinking that allows them to mind wander and daydream, which is affiliated with creativity. So culture matters. Education systems matter. To my mind, the best of all education systems would be a wonderful combination of Asian and Western approaches to education that allow kids to have plenty of playtime, but also help them get the patterns, the important patterns of learning, that matter so much, for example, in learning mathematics and learning language and so forth.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. The different modes of thinking